I am Mary Becker, Program Coordinator for Research and Recruitment here at the Center for Clinical and Translational Science, otherwise known as the CCTS. Today, as always, I am joined by Tiffany Bernard, the Associate Director of Recruitment and Retention, as well as our guest speaker for the day, Jeffrey Jessberger, who is also our Communications and Marketing Coordinator at the CCTS. And he is here today to discuss creative and copy design elements of effective marketing materials. So if you're joining us for the first time, the agenda for today will follow what we typically use, which is we will have a presentation by our speaker, followed by an open discussion where we definitely welcome questions from all of you. If you prefer to use the chat box to enter your questions, some people don't like to speak up, and that's perfectly fine. Go ahead, enter your question anytime into the chat box, and we will get to those at the end of Jeffrey's presentation. And we'll read those aloud so everybody can hear. A lot of times we all have the same questions. Just to let you know, closed captioning is available for today's presentation. So if you need that, you can go ahead and enable that. Okay. We also ask that if you want to enter any questions, please go ahead, put those in the chat box, and we'll get to those as time allows. And I'm going to turn this over to Jeffrey right now. So Jeffrey, if you want to go ahead, and we'll share the screens and we'll move through this presentation.
Awesome. Can you all see the presentation, Mary?
Yes, I can see it.
Awesome. Thank you. So like Mary said, today's presentation is on creative and copy design elements of effective marketing materials. Who am I? My name is Jeffrey Jessberger. I'm a marketing and communications coordinator at the Center for Clinical and Translational Science. I work under Sarah Mann-Wright, who is our consultant for communications and marketing. And my experience generally is with both health and government. And I'm excited to get started today with this talk here. So what is marketing? So this is a technical definition, right, of what marketing is from the American Marketing Association. This definition, you can imagine, is used for businesses and things like that. But for our purposes, right, we can think of marketing as how we communicate what we are offering, our product or service, to the people we are trying to reach. So for our purposes, right, we're thinking about communicating our studies, participation in our studies, how do we get people interested in that? And then we need to think about the people that we're trying to reach, right? I would imagine all of you probably have research studies with very specific audiences. You know, you're looking for people between certain age ranges, you know, certain genders, certain demographic characteristics. So those are going to be the people that we are trying to reach with our marketing as well. Now, why do we care about marketing? You know, as researchers and PIs, there's a lot going on. You know, you've got this thing over here, that thing over there that you need to be focused on. Well, if you want to do effective marketing, it's important because it can impact the awareness of your study. So if you create marketing materials, if you get messages out there, more people are likely to learn about the study. And then you can also increase study recruitment. So as more people learn about the study, they're more likely to then sign up for it or, you know, understand why it's important, things like that. So just to kind of get this point home, we got two examples of study teams, one of which this study team A, you know, runs their study without any marketing materials. You know, maybe they didn't think to start their study with this understanding. And then because they don't have any materials, less people find out about the study. They don't know why the study is important. The study team doesn't recruit enough participants for the study. You know, they try their best, but for some reason they can't get their messages out. And then, you know, worst case scenario, the study is closed or is delayed. And if we think about the effectiveness of marketing to help us, we've got study team B. You know, they run their study with marketing materials, and marketing isn't, you know, a silver, like a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all of your problems, right? Marketing is a way to supplement your already established recruitment tools, you know, and if you've been working with recruitment and retention, you know, they've got a suite of things that they offer besides just the help with marketing and social media. But for this example, you know, people find out about the study, maybe they saw a message on Facebook, they, you know, saw a postcard in a clinic, you know, they saw a poster somewhere, they were able to get that message across to them. And then effective marketing increases the likelihood of attracting enough participants for the study. So we actually offer social media recruitment consultations with different researchers and investigators. And I've learned that this is probably the most important thing, is that you need to get enough participants for your study, and marketing is something that can really help with that. So something to keep in mind generally is that the most effective research studies take into account the audience or participant that is trying to be reached and how that person can be communicated with. So what's the difference between communicating with somebody, like I'm 26, male, engaged. What's the difference between communicating with somebody like me and somebody like Mary, somebody like Tiffany, somebody like my parents or grandparents? These are things that we should be keeping in mind when we developed communications to support the research that we're trying to do. So let's say you're like, oh, this sounds great, Jeff. I realize marketing is important. How do I get started? What's the first step? So the first thing you need to understand for your marketing generally, and this is something that all of you should probably have a firm grasp on, is your audience. So the audience for your study, the audience you're trying to recruit for, is going to be the same audience for your marketing. And we can take the demographic characteristics of that audience and develop marketing around that. So we should be thinking about what makes our audience unique. What are their wants, likes, dislikes, demographic information. And we want to define this audience as completely as possible. This can be kind of difficult though, because if you can imagine a vaping study, a study about college students, it's hard to define college students as, an aggregate sort of thing, because there's, different types of college students, older, younger. But if you were looking at college students and their own demographic characteristics and how those were different from, non-college students, what were the ages, what does the gender makeup look like? Where would they be located? What are their likes and their dislikes? So if you think about these questions, we're thinking ages, 18 to 25, every gender, location. If we're doing a study at Ohio State, we're thinking close to Columbus. And you can imagine what their likes and dislikes are probably as you think about it. The easiest way to define, like I said, a large aggregate group like college students is to think of one person that kind of defines the characteristics of that group. So instead of saying, college students, you say something like Kyle Smith. So if we're doing a study about vaping, we can imagine Kyle Smith as our audience persona. So we're kind of taking the characteristics of our target audience and defining it and putting it into just one person that kind of represents that. So Kyle Smith is our target persona for our study, and these are his demographic characteristics, and we can imagine using these to develop marketing that will be effective for him. So, and then here at the bottom, developing a persona allows us to better understand who we are trying to market to. So again, this is just a way to take kind of a large group of people and kind of understand on a more personal level, what about them is important for our marketing purposes. So you all probably understand who your audience is for your studies. So what do you do with that information? So the next part of what we're going to be talking about is the message. So, what are we telling our audience to get them interested in our study? What are we saying to them to get them to sign up, to get them to participate? So there are two main elements to the message. In advertising terms, they are creative and copy. And this is what the presentation is mainly going to be about today. So the creative in advertising terms and in terms for our marketing is going to be the visual element of the message. So this is going to be the picture or the video that we choose. If you can imagine scrolling through Facebook and one of those autoplay ads runs and it's a video with stuff going on and then there's text above it, the creative is that video. So it's the video that plays, it's the picture that shows up. And then the copy. So the copy is the text associated with the image. So the text is going to be asking somebody to do something, giving clarifying information, just giving more information in general. So when you're looking for a creative for ads that you're making, these are some questions that you might be asking yourself. How do I find effective images and videos for marketing? How do we know whether images or videos are effective, right? Because if you're just looking for an image, how do you know that it's going to be effective for your audience? And then generally just like, what are the tips and tricks? So how do we find effective images or videos for our ads? So this is actually pretty cut and dry. When you look for images or videos, you want to make sure that you're looking at websites that are royalty free. So these first two options, unsplash.com and pixels.com, they're royalty free websites, which means that you can go in, you can search for an image, and then no one owns that image. You don't have to pay anybody. You don't have to provide attribution. So say, hey, like this image was taken by this person. And because of that, it's a really easy way to avoid any kind of legal issues. Something to keep in mind is that if you are looking for images or videos for a study, you really can't just go to Google Images and search for images. I mean, I guess you can, but those images that you find could be copyrighted, someone else could own them. And if we're using them in our marketing, and if someone sees hey, I took that image, I own that image, you could get into legal trouble. So from the outset, we just want to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in a situation where that sort of thing could happen, as little as chances those are. So those first two options are going to be good. And then at the CCTS, we actually have access to iStock. So iStock is a paid stock photo service. So if you can imagine, these first two are free, but iStock is paid. But because of that, it's got a little bit more options. There's a little bit more specific with what you can search for. So if you're looking for images and you can't find something that works, ask us and we can look in iStock and find images for you. Now, there are a bunch of royalty-free sites out there as well. These are just the two main ones at the top that I know of. And then something to keep in mind too is that if you work at Ohio State in research or you work at the medical center, you should have access to brand.osu.edu. So you sign into brand.osu.edu with your name and dot number. And there's images in there, there's branding guidelines and stuff, which is going to be a really good resource for you. But we'll talk more about that later, actually. So right here. So here you can find high quality images, specific color swatches and things like that to use in your images, or in your marketing. So think about this as well. There are resources available to you if you want to create effective marketing stuff. So how do we know whether our images or videos are effective? This was that other question. The easiest way to do this is to follow a few simple rules. So rule one, generally, images should be of the target audience that we are trying to reach. And this makes a lot of sense when you think about this example. So if we can imagine our vaping study, and we're looking at two different types of creative for this ad, which image do you think would be more appropriate if we're trying to reach college students? Generally, right, people would probably say the image on the right, the second image, because it shows more of that demographic information, that demographic group that we're trying to reach there. Now, this second rule is a little more flexible. So if appropriate, images should be of people smiling, happy, looking at the camera, making eye contact. Because if you can imagine scrolling through your Facebook feed and you're looking at pictures of your family, your friends, right? They're smiling and looking at the camera. So the idea is that you're showing people what they're used to seeing. Now, something to keep in mind with this is that if you're doing a study where it could be inappropriate for people to be happy, smiling, if you're doing end-of-life studies or other things that, you're like, this is not appropriate at all, that's fine. This is just a little bit more flexible as well. Copy. So again, we mentioned the creative, right? So that is the image or the video. And then copy is going to be the text. So this is where we tell people what we want them to do. What sort of action do we want them to take? What sort of emotion are we trying to elicit? How are we getting them interested in our study? So the first rule generally with copy is that we need a hook that piques their interest. A hook basically is where you ask a question, you elicit some kind of emotion, you stir something up in somebody that makes them go, stop and go, oh, So again, the easiest way to portray this is with an example. So we have the no hook example here. Let's say you were trying to get somebody to participate in your research and you just said, participate in this study at OSU. You're telling somebody what to do, but you're not really giving them that information, that real thing that grabs them. So if we can imagine this sentence with a hook, interested in being part of important research at OSU, participate in the study. All of a sudden, you're asking them a question that makes them stop and go, you know what? I mean, either yes or no. And then if they say yes, you've hooked them in there. It makes it a little more engaging. The second rule is we need to resolve the hook. So if we're asking a question, if we're eliciting some emotion, we then want to answer that question when we resolve the hook. So if we can imagine our no hook example again, right, it's right there. But then our hook example, we had said, interested in being part of important research at OSU. People are thinking, oh, like, where is this important research happening? Everyday research is being done at OSU that will change lives. So again, you're asking the question and then you're resolving that with what we want them to do, which is participate in this study. So the third rule, this is where, this is the thing most people know what to do, right? They go, hey, we want you to take this action. We want you to fill out this pre-screening survey. We want you to head to our study search page. We want you to call this number, whatever. So if you can imagine, that's the third part of the copy you should be focusing on. So time to learn about the basics of branding. So beyond just the message, what is branding and why does it matter for my research study? Especially considering, we're not talking about luxury brands, we're not talking about private label brands, we're talking about research. So why is this important? This is another just technical definition. So branding is the promotion of a particular product or company by means of advertising a distinctive design. So how can we kind of brand our study so that it stands out and gets interest from people? So there are a few elements, just standards for good branding. For those of you that are creating postcards, posters, more physical things like that, you should try to make things that are less distracting. You only want to have 1 or 2 fonts, for example. 3 or 4 fonts, it starts to get difficult to figure out what's going on. You want to use consistent coloring. You don't want to use a ton of different colors. You want people to focus on the message you're trying to get across, not on, oh, like this font looks weird, this color looks weird. And then we want to use high quality images, as we had discussed, right? So we want to use images from those royalty-free sites. We want to go to brand.osu.edu and find some stock photos, of researchers, of students working, things like that. And like we had mentioned before, I want to reiterate that OSU has a lot of different assets that we can use. And something to keep in mind too, when you're branding your study, when you're making, a poster, when you're making a postcard, is that you want to take advantage of kind of the cachet that Ohio State has and put Ohio State logos, for either the institution you're with, whether that's just Ohio State, or the Med Center, or if your lab has a logo, because you using Ohio State's logos or their brands or their colors, you kind of borrow from the cachet that Ohio State has, and you add some more legitimacy to the marketing that you're trying to build. So if you can imagine this PowerPoint presentation without this little Ohio State University Center for Clinical and Translational Science logo at the bottom right, if you didn't know, you'd be like, oh, I don't know if this is legitimate or not, but with that logo, you're kind of, it's a little more trustworthy. So some examples of bad and good branding. So this is a bad example. I put this together. It's confusing, right? It's kind of hard to figure out what the message is. There's too many different fonts. The image is of low quality, so it's not as engaging. And then, right, we have this, you can participate by calling this number, but there's no hook, there's no, there's no resolving that hook. So this is a bad example, but a good example, I actually created this for one of the studies that we were assisting with. So if you can imagine this postcard going out to people or being in a clinic, right? This image would be on the front, interested in helping us learn how to prevent lung cancer. And then we resolve, that's the hook, right? And then on the back, we resolve the hook, we tell them what to do, and then we have more just information in general. But it's a little more laid out. It's a little bit easy to understand, like, what am I to do? We're getting the information across and it's a little more engaging. So for those of you that are wondering, like, yeah, this seems like a lot of work. I'm not sure if I have time to do all of this. So this is the secret sauce. These are the things that other people won't tell you and that you should focus on to kind of just take everything to the next level. So I don't know if all of you have seen this. I know Mary had mentioned that she had never seen this before. So this is something they teach you in advertising classes when you first start out. And something to note is that I'm not entirely sure whether or not this is scientific, but certain colors are associated with certain emotions. So if you can imagine all of these companies wanting to send a certain kind of message with their the colors that they use. So, certain companies want to be seen as peaceful or excited or optimistic, and then so we can think, okay, I know, my study is about X and I want that to be seen as friendly. Maybe you can use more orange in that to show that emotion. Now this isn't, something you need to do. Again, this is just something that will just take all of the marketing that you create to the next level, and it's something to keep in mind. The second tips and tricks thing to know about is Canva. So a lot of people are worried that when they create marketing materials or when they do social media and stuff, that they're going to have to pay somebody a lot of money or they need to download expensive software. This is not the case. If you go to canva.com, canva.com, you can sign in with your, just your OSU dot number or a Gmail. And it's a graphic design studio, basically, with a ton of free templates, free images that you can use to design anything, and really anything. You can make social media posts, you can make, like down here, brochures, YouTube videos, anything like this. And so, for example, the example I showed earlier of the good postcard, I really just took one of these postcard examples on the left here, added it in there, changed the text up, and boom, it was like professional made and ready to go. So this is really something that could be useful for you. And then the last thing I want to touch on is borrowing best practices. So in your day-to-day life, if you see advertising or art that you feel is effective, if you're scrolling through Facebook and an ad pops up and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is a really good ad. Think about what makes that ad great, and then try to take some of that and use it for yourself. So this isn't, I'm not saying, to steal an idea or to steal images or anything like that, but we want to take what works from other people and use it ourselves and kind of reiterate on it or make it better. So go about your daily life and be on the lookout for these sorts of things and think, oh, like that's a great ad, or that's a bad ad, actually, that didn't really, evoke any emotions. It didn't resolve anything for me. It was confusing, things like that. It's another thing to keep in mind. So when you promote your marketing messages, my experience is that the most effective way is through social media, just generally. It's an easy way to reach lots and lots of people very quickly and very cheaply, especially if you do paid ads. And I know, for those of you that don't know, the CCTS offers paid social media consultations. So we assist recruitment and researchers to help recruit more participants for their studies. So if that's something you'd be interested in, you can email Tiffany, Mary, or myself. But in general, there are a ton of different platforms for promotion. And then traditional platforms, right, like printing postcards and putting them in clinics, or putting posters up, handing brochures out to people. It's just different ways to get those messages out. So in general, what did we learn, right? So we learned about what marketing is for our purposes. There's a technical definition of marketing, but for us, it's going to be how we communicate what we are offering to the people we're trying to reach out to. And then everyone, hopefully understands who their audience is. So your audience is going to be the same audience for your research. We learned about the message, right? We learned about the two elements, creative and copy. So the creative is going to be the image, and we're going to use high quality images that we find either through iStock by requesting them from the CCTS or from those royalty-free sites. And then copy, right? When we tell people what to do, we're not just saying, hey, do this thing, or giving them a reason why. We're piquing their interest and we're resolving that hook. We learned about branding basics. So we learned about how color can be used. We learned about consistent fonts. We learned about brand.osu.edu, and the assets that are available there. And then we learned tips and tricks. We learned about Canva and color and emotion, like I said, and how we can kind of take everything to the next level. So with that, I'd like to move to Q&A and open discussion. Thank you all.
Thanks, Jeffrey. That was great. We do have a question here. I'm going to read it out loud for everyone, and then you can go ahead and answer that.
Mhm.
The question is, I'm always unsure if I should use an OSU WMC logo, Spielman specific logo, or the James logo. What would you suggest for a study in the breast center?
That's a good question. So we run into things a lot where, it's this person's involved and this person is also involved and this person is also involved. I would say to use wherever your study is located, use their logo. And if someone comes and is like, hey, why isn't my logo on it? Then you can always add it from there. But if you can always, so I would use one or use all of them and just evenly space them out at the bottom of whatever you're making. Um, so for example, the CCTS, we work with Nationwide Children's Hospital. And so we'll put CCTS on one side and Nationwide on the other side. But that's a good question. If you actually want to contact me as well, we can talk through that some more.
Great, thank you. Does anybody have any questions out there that they would just like to jump in right now and ask? So I actually have one, Jeffrey, for you.
Sure.
What is the best piece of advice, because you've been teaching me a little bit about creating
Yeah.
ads and things, what is the best piece of advice that you can offer to someone who's new to the marketing
Yeah.
creative ad world?
So I think the best thing to keep in mind is that what you want to say isn't necessarily what the audience wants to hear. So, a lot of times we think from our own perspective, like, well, I need X number of people to participate in this study, or, I'm going to fail and like people need to do this for me. But a lot of what other people are thinking is, what's in it for me? If you're talking to your audience, they're not thinking like, oh, I want to help you with the study and I want to help you. They're like, what is the benefit I'm going to get from this? It's, they call it, what's in it for me? So just in general, think not only from your own perspective, but from the perspective of your audience. If you're communicating with them, how can the thing you're asking for be a win-win? How can it be a win for you and a win for them?
Good answer. We have another one here in our chat box. Can you
Mm-hmm.
speak to video advertising? So the rules for the amount of text on an ad, etc.
Yeah. So in general, so they always say like a picture is worth 1,000 words, a video is worth 1,000 pictures, something like that. How a video is so much more engaging. So in general, videos are going to be harder to produce just because of the amount of work that goes into it. But if you're just using stock video, excuse me, you can use video on like major social platforms and put videos out. So you can do ads on Facebook or things like that. But something to keep in mind with that is that people don't have long attention spans, especially on social media platforms, right? If you can imagine someone sitting with their phone, they're not scrolling like really, really slowly and looking at every single thing that pops up. Even autoplay videos, if you're scrolling through Facebook and a video autoplays, how often are you watching that video all the way to the end? You're probably watching, if it's interesting, between 10 to maybe 30 seconds of it. So that's why if you're doing video, I would recommend making it 30 seconds or less. The important thing about that too is that traditionally, if you're thinking of TV, normal ad spots were either 30 seconds to a minute. So people are used to taking like that amount of time to watch a video and then, okay, move on to the next thing. But a lot of the same, just like rules apply, right? You don't want to have too much text. You want to tell people, you want to evoke some kind of emotion. You want to give clear guidance on what you want them to do. You want to, if you're making an ad about a specific audience, you want the audience should be represented in the video, things like that. We normally don't do a lot of video stuff, but if you would like to talk further, you can always request a social media consultation with the CCTS, and we can always chat further as well.
So kind of along with the creative and the creatives that you use in a presentation, do you have
Mm-hmm.
any thoughts about if people use memes or, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to pronounce this, GIFs, um, in
GIFs,
their
GIFs, yeah.
GIFs in their social media posts or ads? Do you think that's effective, or is that not the correct use of something like that?
Right. So it's a kind of a difficult thing to get a grasp on, right? Because if you're trying to reach like college age students or teenagers, for example, it's like, you kind of come across as, out of touch if you're an institution like throwing memes up. But if it makes sense for you, then, if you're known for that sort of thing. But if you can imagine, Ohio State, if you're representing Ohio State, has a certain set of characteristics about it, just like the institution in general. We stand for academic rigor and research and all these very legitimate things. And then if you're throwing memes out there, if you're doing things that are a little, not in tune with what people expect of OSU, that incongruence kind of throws people off. It's why a lot of times when people are, like, it's like, imagine a very serious reporter that you follow on Twitter who is constantly tweeting facts and then all of a sudden starts sending memes out about the news or whatever. You'd be like, this is not what I was expecting. Or if you can imagine like a comedy TV show that all of a sudden turns into a drama with the same characters, you're like, it's the same people, but the message is kind of getting lost in translation. So in general, I would avoid that kind of stuff unless you are known for it, unless you are, a brand that's known for that sort of thing.
Good point. Just to kind of make this timely, do you think that COVID has affected any creative content of ads? And if
Yeah.
so, how?
Yeah. So something to keep in mind, right? We're all living through COVID-19 right now. And because of that, we've had to adapt a lot of the work that we've done creatively. I've been in contact with the team over at WexMed because we've been discussing advertising and using creative. And they mentioned that if you're putting materials out there with people in them, they ask that the people in those ads be wearing masks. We don't want to make it seem like if things come out of Ohio State and the people in the ads, even if it's a stock image, if the people in those ads are not, socially distanced or wearing masks, we don't want to be sending the wrong message. So it might be a little harder to find images like that on those free stock photo sites that I mentioned. So if you need images like that, please come to us at the CCTS. There are a ton of photos of people wearing masks and following guidelines in our paid stock photo service. So if you need that, focus on that. But yeah, in general, it's definitely changed. And the rules seem to be changing like every other week. So, just trying to keep up with that.
Thanks. Are there any other questions out there that you have not added to our chat box or would just like to unmute yourself and ask Jeffrey?
Mary, I would like to say something real quick.
Sure.
I know we've talked about several of the services that the CCTS Recruitment Retention Office offers with communications. We do want to assure you guys that as with this, the CTSA program, most of our services are free to you. There are some charges when it comes to using Facebook ads and things like that, but that is just a pass-through cost that we charge you for the cost of the ad. But for us helping you with designing marketing materials, looking things over, making recommendations, those are free services that we do offer to help you out, okay?
Thanks, Tiffany.
You're welcome.
Anyone else like to ask a question or add anything here? If you are not with Ohio State, because I see some names that I don't normally recognize in our Recruitment Cafe, if you would like to ask anything in particular that might be general to everyone, even about your site though, this would be the time to do that now. Otherwise, we're probably going to give you about 25 minutes back of your day. So I would, whoops, we do have one. So the question, Jeffrey, is if my study is for family units, do recruitment materials still need to show face masks?
That's a good question. If you email that question to us, I can send it over to the team at WexMed that we're following the guidelines from.
Jeffrey, do you want to just give out your email?
Yes. So my email is Jeffrey, so Jeffrey, Jeffrey dot JESSBERGER at osumc.edu. So jeffrey.jessberger@osumc.edu, and not burger like the delicious burger, burger like the city in Germany where my ancestors are from.
And also, hey, can you talk a little bit about the guidelines again, about the mask/materials? Can you repeat that, please?
Yes. So because of COVID-19 right now, Wexmed and the university are being strict about the images that we put out that are representing Ohio State. So if you're putting, marketing materials out there with pictures of people, they have asked that images that are in the marketing show people with masks or socially distanced, or generally following guidelines. They don't want a normal stock photo of, if you can imagine, like a ton of people like hugging or like high-fiving, shaking hands, that kind of thing, because we don't want to be seen as incongruent with the requests of the university and Wexmed of people to generally follow health guidelines. So if you have any very specific questions about that, email them to me and I will send them over to my contact at Wexmed, who I've been working with this about.
Thanks. Anybody else would like to add a question or ask a question here? All right then. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and to Jeffrey for being kind enough to share your knowledge regarding the creative and design elements for effective marketing.
Thank you, Mary.
Also, yep, absolutely. Also, a thank you to Deidre for the closed captioning today. Hopefully people are using that if you need to. And we hope to get a feedback survey out to you in the next few days regarding this presentation. So please, if you have a topic also that you would like us to cover, let us know in that feedback survey. We do read all of those. Our next Recruitment Cafe will be in October. So look for those announcements to come in the next several weeks. Also of note, we are in the process of building a toolkit of resources, and that is where we will eventually be storing the recording of this presentation and things such as topics like what Jeffrey covered today, adding best practices as well. So again, on those surveys, if you have any information that you would like added to that toolkit, please write that in. And as we are going along compiling everything, we will take those suggestions as well. Also, if you are interested in learning more about the services we offer at the CCTS, you can go to osu.ccts.edu. I did want to look here real quickly. Let's see, I think that's all that we needed to cover. So again, thank you to everyone and have a great rest of the week. Remember to wear your masks and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.